Welcome to xAPI Week 10 Case Studies in Practice. We have with us today Zult Ola and Sarah Mercier. They're going to present some XA case studies for us, which is great. We have our xAPI party April 27th. You can RSVP and come and see all the great things that are going to be in the xAPI party. I will drop links in chat when I'm done speaking. We have Learning Solutions April 12th to the 14th. We're still accepting online registration through today, April 7th, I believe. It's not on that slide, but I'm pretty sure we are. We have 2 xAPI sessions for you at Learning Solutions. And then if you're not a member of the Guild, I highly encourage you to become a member. It is free. I'll drop a link in the chat after I'm done speaking. You have all kinds of resources, lots of freebies, and discounts on our face-to-face conferences. So I encourage you to do that. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to turn things over first to Sarah Mercier with Learning Ninjas, and she's going to kick us off with the case study.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see everybody starting to sign on and see so many familiar faces. I'm really excited to be here with y'all today. I'm going to share a case study on xAPI, as Karen mentioned, and I have a very short period of time to do it. So keep your questions coming in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer those. I wanted to give you a heads up that I'm going to drop some links in the chat that are in the presentation. So be watching for those. There are a couple of resources I'm going to provide to you. So if you are interested in some of the things that I share, I'm going to be sharing those with you in the chat as well. So in this session, I'm going to talk a little bit about implementing xAPI in a pilot. So this process that I'm going to share with you today is the process that we use at Learning Ninjas to implement xAPI just for the pilot piece of it. And so I'm going to talk through each of these at a high level, mainly because we don't have a ton of time. But again, if you have questions, just let me know. So I also wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about limitations versus what is actually feasible, right? So the things that we talk about in this little presentation are things that you can immediately take and apply. And I'm looking forward to seeing what y'all do with it. So here's a really great picture of me, and I'm going to pass that. So we're going to start off with just a little high level on the organization. So the organization that I've chosen to share with you all today is actually a benefit services organization. So they're based in the United States, and they have learners that are actually in an external audience. So their learners that are accessing their training materials are in different organizations all over the US. So it's not something that's internal to their organization. And this company, obviously, as a benefit services organization, they have a really high sensitivity to privacy and security. So some of the things that we did in their implementation of their pilot were heavily dependent upon working with IT to get buy-in for this. And not that we necessarily really needed them for the implementation so much as just approving it. So if any of you have struggled with that in your organization, you will relate. So at a high level, this is the process that we use with each of our xAPI pilots. So it's these 5 steps. Sometimes these are happening at the same time, and sometimes they might be in a slightly different order, but these are all the things that we do. So the first thing that we do on any project is our data strategy. We figure out, what do you actually want to know? The second thing that we do is a technology assessment. So what are all the platforms and things that you have in your learning ecosystem right now that we can leverage? And it was very special on this project, so I'll share that with you. The third step is our setup of our LRS. So anytime we set up an LRS, we are going through the process of defining some requirements with that organization to see, are there any special IT requirements? What kind of data visualization do you need? Pricing obviously can be a factor. So we go through that setup process through the requirements and setup. We put together a profile. I don't want to use profile with the big P in this case, because there's some really, really important stuff that a lot of folks in this cohort are doing around profiles and sharing industry profiles. This is a profile within the organization. So I'll share a little bit about what that looks like. And then obviously you have to put together your xAPI enabled content and test it to make sure that it's sending the statements that you want and you're getting the data visualizations that you're trying to get out of that content. So let's start with data strategy. The question I always ask our clients whenever we work with a new project is, what is it that you want to know about these training efforts that you're doing right now that you can't answer? So what information would be really helpful for you to have, but you can't answer that with the data that you receive right now? And so here is what this particular client put together. So they said, here are some of the questions that we have. And here's what we mean by that. This is an example of what we think that might look like. And so then we kind of assigned what type of data that might be. So they asked questions like, hey, we have worksheets that we have in our courses, in our modules. Are people downloading them? Are they watching our videos that are in our modules? Are they completing the module? And that's obviously based on that certain module, what completion looks like. They wanted to know, how far are people progressing through a module? How much time are they spending in it? How many times did a user click a link in the module? And so these are pretty basic, and I tend to get these same types of questions each time that I work on a project, a new xAPI project. These tend to be the things that are most top of mind. Obviously, when you get into specific content, then you start to think of other things. Oh, it'd be really interesting to see how someone answered in this different, this specific scenario and things like that. So there are obviously so many things that you can do with xAPI, but this starts to get you thinking about what are just some basic things that I'd like to have access to that I don't. Now, some of you might be thinking, I could probably get some of this in my LMS, right? Or in my learning platform. And that might be true. So I want to talk a little bit more about that in our technology assessment step. So for this particular company, they do not have a learning platform. All of their content is hosted on the web. So they do not use an LMS, LXP, L, whatever, add in your acronym. They just host all of their content on their website, because remember, they have an external audience, and the folks that are going to access their courses, they're not going to log into an LMS. They've actually run a pilot on this already before. So they have to make it a little easier for them. They wanted to make sure that all of that information is just accessible. They had no learning record store, which that was part of our implementation. They use Google Analytics to get some of their high-level user data. So the only thing that they were getting out of their courses is, how many unique participants, maybe where in the US are they accessing this from? They can kind of get some demographic information based on those users' IP addresses. So if any of you are familiar with using Google Analytics, maybe this is familiar to you as well. So, some basic data that they were able to capture. Oh, hold on, went backwards. This might be familiar to some of you. All of their content is authored in the Articulate 360 suite. So a lot of their stuff is in Rise, some of it's in Storyline. I mean, they also have some videos and some other resources that they use. They actually use quite the video library for some of their products. So, your typical stuff, nothing fancy. So we get to the point where we're setting up the LRS, and we ended up landing on Veracity for the LRS. I love working with Veracity, and I work with it a lot. We have this one set up for this particular project just because it was very accessible to them to have the access to the LRS as well as the visualizations out of the box. They were not going to host it on premise just for this pilot. Now, this may change later. It's possible that it may change, but for our pilot, this is where we've landed working with their IT team. As I mentioned, we had to go through several hoops with implementing this and getting permission from their IT folks to implement it. So privacy was a big concern. They wanted to make sure that no user data was stored. So that was something that landed us on Veracity for this project. And as you see here, we set up a test LRS as well as a production LRS so that we didn't muddy up our production LRS or the LRS of record with any of our testing that we did through the pilot. Step 4 was to set up their profile, and I am actually going to share a template with you that we use during the pilot phase of setting up, of documenting all of the verbs that are used, how they're used, different, the activity IDs. So all of our IRIs are all listed in here. We keep track of everything in a program called Airtable. And if you're not familiar with Airtable, it's a free tool. It's a database type tool that you can use that it operates similarly to Excel, like a spreadsheet format. And you can actually export this to Excel. So I posted a link in the chat for you if you're interested in this template. We have a list of verbs that are commonly used. Obviously, you can add to that as you identify different types of statements that you're setting up, different verbs that you're using for different things. And this helps us with our consistency, making sure that everything is not only documented and how we're using different verbs and activities in their courses, but also that it is shareable and collaborative. That's the reason why this is currently in Airtable. So it's just starting to see, you know, how are we using different verbs and what courses are things being used in, and describing what those activities are. So that template spreadsheet is available to you in the chat if you're interested in having a template to start from. And step 5 in our journey was to set up our content and test it out in the test LRS instance. So in our pilot, we just used a course that was built in Articulate Rise. That particular course was around some tax rules, and considering it's tax season, that was something that was really important to them to track. And so they wanted to make sure that there were certain things that they had some visibility to in that particular course. It was a very popular course about an allowance that that folks could get on their taxes that were their benefits customers. We actually jumped off of some code from Mel Milloway. I'm going to post this in the chat. If you work with Articulate Rise and you want to get statements that are not canned xAPI statements, if you want to get custom statements and actually report out on how people are doing certain things in your course, in your Rise course, Mel Milloway has some code out on GitHub that we started with. She's got a couple of videos on YouTube where she talks about, you know, tracking page links and tracking, you know, tabbed interactions and stuff like that in a Rise module. There's a lot more that you can track. So we started with her code, and I wanted to give her mad props for that because she put together some really good starter code that we were able to jump off from. So check that out, and definitely start where you know other people have done some work and help get you jump start on some of these things. The next thing that we did was we used a tool called Sublime Text to edit that Rise module. So essentially, you actually, because they're not using a learning platform, we publish it out of Rise for just HTML. So we don't actually publish it for xAPI. We publish it for HTML, and then we edited that published file in Sublime Text to custom code in those statements that we wanted to track. So we were tracking page views, and we were tracking some of the interactions inside certain pages. And you can do that by basically tracking, for those of you who want to get into the technical piece of it, basically tracking what the name of that interaction is using the class. So we were able to do that and edit those files to make sure we got our custom code in. Then we sent that data to the test LRS. So we were able to see, are the statements coming through the way we wanted? Are there any edits we needed to make? We actually did make some edits to what we named some of the things in the custom code. We also made some edits to how we tracked certain elements. There were some that we abandoned because they weren't useful. For example, we started to track time spent in the module, but then we found that if somebody left up their browser session that it skewed those numbers. So we were getting average times of, several hours spent in the module, which we knew was wrong from some of those outliers. And so we just found that it wasn't useful enough data for us to track. So for those of you who are interested in tracking time spent, you might find that you don't really get much useful data out of that, actually. I say that because a lot of people say they're interested in that. It doesn't tend to give you useful enough data in many cases. Then once we had validated our data and we knew we could get the visualizations that we were looking for, and we had all those set up, then we just swapped out our file, our JavaScript file, to point to the live instance. So we already had our code set up. All we had to do is swap out the endpoint. So instead of pointing it to the test LRS, we started pointing it to our production LRS. And then they published the course. So we were able to put that out there. I did want to mention that one of the things that is challenging about programming xAPI code into Rise is that you have to get the actual links that you want to, that are going to pop up in the browser. So we had to actually go through and publish this course as if we were going to publish it to get the actual links that would pop up in the browser so that it tracked them appropriately. So I wanted to mention that because in Rise, the object ID for different pages and stuff, like they're very, you all know they're random identifiers. And so you want to have some way to track what each page actually is so that you can tie a name back to that identifier. So that's a challenge when you're working without a learning platform. And here is what we got I'm just showing you one of their dashboards. So this was their page views. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what we found in this. So for their page views, we were able to see how someone progressed through this course. And what we found that was interesting is that folks were kind of like jogging along until about page 3, and then they jumped straight over to page 6, which was how to actually calculate the tax deduction, which made a lot of sense to me. If you're opening that course and all you want to know is how to calculate the tax deduction, then maybe that's something you jump over to. So that gave us a little bit of information for how people might want to use this course. And for us, it might mean that we take out just the how to calculate piece and make it a little performance support document or a little job aid that is housed separately outside of this course to give people faster access to just that piece. The other thing that we found is that no one was going to the survey page. They weren't even hitting the page. So y'all already know that it's hard to get people to respond to surveys, but the chances that people will respond to your survey if they never even see it is next to none. So one of the other changes that we made as a result of just this super basic data was that we moved the survey over to the contact page. So that way, at least they were seeing it. And then they can make a decision on whether or not they're going to actually complete it. And so we just made those changes. That new published file is about to go up this week. And so we can start to see, did they see an increase in those survey results, which is the first thing, is going to be on our next steps. So some of our next steps are going to be, we have our next module we're doing that we're setting up for them. We are tracking their call to action. So they have a call to action in that course, and we're tracking how many people actually hit that call to action and go out. They're checking to see if they're going to an external site. I also mentioned that they're moving that survey onto the contact page. We're going to see if they get an increase in any of their responses. We're applying this code to all of their courses. So this gives them just out of the box some information that they can use alongside their Google Analytics data to make some better informed decisions. Because remember, they were getting nothing before. So this is giving them a little bit more information to make some decisions. And then we're taking their courses on a case-by-case basis and evaluating each one to see what's important to you in this course. What was your outcome that you set out to achieve with this course at the beginning? And let's see what kind of data we can collect around that to see if you're achieving that outcome. So a lot of this is around trying to figure out what was your intent with this course in the first place and what are people doing to that end. So that's how we approached it. The last thing that I'll leave with you before you move on to the next case study is a couple of links. So I already mentioned the xAPI profile template. I'll paste that in chat again along with the code. And we also have a course that you can check out that we've had forever. It's on learnxapi.com. It's our xAPI basics course. So if any of this sounded good to you and you're really excited about getting started, you want to get handheld through it, that's a really great option as well. So I think I'm at my time. Salt, I did a good job. I left you time. So I'll take any questions. I'll hang out for a little bit if anyone has anything in the chat.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Sarah. Thanks for the template and Mel Milloway's code. I put them into the chat. They're also out in the event feed. They're in both places. So the event feed will be persistent and the chat is just located within this session. So Sarah, if you would stop presenting and we'll get Zsolt on with us and there we go.
All right, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to take this, move it around.
Great. We're seeing everything. So take it away.
Excellent. So thank you so much for joining for this case study. My name is Zsolt Ola. I'm a senior learning technologist at Amazon. And internally, Amazon, we are part of the AET, Employee Experience and Technology team. We also have a fun team. You can see this is one of our talented designers created this hand-drawn sort of mascot. We do basically, it looks like we're reaching for the sky, but it's not. It's actually we're already in the sky, kind of navigating the problems and challenges that we have in the knowledge wisdom. And this session is actually something very different from Sarah, so it's perfect, I think, working together after the Sarah session. By the way, the name of this guy is Naviblade because he's navigating through this increased sort of complexity of learning. So this story is an xAPI story, and it is going to be less about technology, less about the xAPI statements and all that. But I want you to think about xAPI in a different way. And so our focus is going to be basically hearts, minds, and hands. And so, when we come up with a project, a learning project, we always think about like we need to find the hearts and minds and convince people. And we also added the hands because unless you actually have some actions out of this concept, your hearts and minds are great, but we need to see the end result. So this is a little story, an engagement story, that actually these three things, hearts, minds, and hands, actually fall into the same categories of engagement that we measure. Effective, how you like it, how immersive it is. Cognitive, so what you learn, the contextualization, the reflections that you have, and then the physical part, what you actually do while you're going through these experiences. So here's our little project. It was a proof of concept. We had an already existing project. It was for managers learning about emotional intelligence and specifically how to handle emotional situations with their direct reports. There was already measurement set up for the original one. And so our sort of proof of concept was, can we build something that it's more engaging and more effective at the same time? We started out with evidence-based design, so I'm not going to get into this, but you actually have to have good design rather than just technology anyway. So we do use evidence-based design, working backwards model. We already had learning transfer evaluation model in place, so we know what we're after, not only just the learning experience part, but what happens after the job. And then generally our guidance was less content and more impact. So how do we take all the stuff that the other traditional project had, learning resources, but not using unless we really have to? And then how do we create more impact and measure the impact as well? But before we went anywhere, we had this one question, and we sort of danced around this idea of it's not about the technology anyway. So forget the technology, whether you're excited about AR, VR, or xAPI. But what is something that's missing today that there's a gap? And if you had this one thing, an L&D, that would make a big impact. And so the number one thing that we came up with was this bite-sized golden chicken nugget of wisdom. So imagine just you pop it into the microwave, eat it, and then you have all the wisdom and you can do things. That didn't work out. So the second thing that we thought of was this dialogue. And I'll explain what I mean by dialogue. So imagine a relevant, meaningful, data-driven dialogue over time that leads to learning, application, and change. And so here's what it looks like in our situation. So there are two managers going through this experience. They should have a dialogue between them. We are not isolated people sitting in somewhere in a cubicle or at home, and it's not us against the LMS. It's actually working teams, work with a social environment. So these people should talk to each other. That led to some, I think, the starting point of the project was that it has to be some sort of an asynchronous cohort activity, but with individual pace. So this is one of the dialogue going back and forth. The second type of dialogue is your self-reflection. So if there's a goal setting, I need to think about my goals. I need to think about what matters for me, what values I have. Then we had the learning experiences. Obviously, there's dialogue between those, me as a user and the learning experience that the designers put in for me. We had to store something. This dialogue, this whole conversation needs to be somewhere. And this is where the LRS came in. And so we had back and forth talking to that as well. Then we decided that we also need something called a trigger engine. So something that actually triggers things and events based on things that happen throughout this experience. Not only when someone completes a course somewhere, but decisions inside the course. So basically make this adaptive. And then we can break out this big experience to small chunks and only provide what they need, when they need it, and how they need it. In order to do that, we needed obviously data analytics to monitor this report out, analyze things, and maybe even predict behaviors. And so you can see all these arrows are basically dialogue between pieces of the puzzle. And these are humans and also some machines. And at the end of it was basically this big pile of things that if they could talk to each other, if they could have a good dialogue, because dialogue is not just me telling you what to do, that's a monologue. A dialogue is we're reacting to each other, we learn together, but also capturing this tacit knowledge and then use it for later. So these are the elements, and this is what sort of xAPI gave us, the capability to facilitate this meaningful data-informed dialogue between machines and humans. And then ultimately, our goal is to drive change and use the hearts, minds, and hands. In other words, it's like a common language that we all speak. And one of the things I always suggest that you don't have to wait until you're perfect and not even fluent. It's like going to a different country. You can explore that country just by understanding the very basics and then go from there. Because if you wait until you're fluent in a language, you might not go anywhere ever. So what does it look like in reality? We used Learning Pool's Stream Suite just because they had the components already. But basically, you can build this out in any other ways as long as you have those elements or components of the system. So it was a 5-week course from end to end, but self-paced, asynchronous. So as they went into and started this whole journey, every manager started the same way. How we ended up with is very different. But a starting point was the same. And from there, a lot of different things happened depending on their skills, depending on their buy-in or attitude. So, for example, there was an assessment in the beginning about how they feel about emotional intelligence. So someone has already a high EQ and understand how it works, how to apply. They don't need to see all this stuff about rah-rah, hoorah thing. They just actually need examples and maybe some practice on the job. Others might need it like as the brand new managers needed some more examples. For example, it could be some sort of mind opening or questioning of your mind frame sort of thing. So anyway, it started out the same, and then they have different routes. So we had Learning Locker, and the LRS was kind of the brain part of this. This is where everything went in, all the statements coming in. That talk to stream, which is what you see here, basically that holds the elements, the learning resources, and the two can talk back and forth. So that way, an assessment, for example, could go in and complete already some learning experiences that we know they don't need to take. They were still there, and if they wanted to, if they were interested in, they can get into them, but they didn't have to based on the assessment. So that was the normal sort of LXP approach. But then we also had this dilemma with the LMS that the the LMS is built on this notion normally that the smallest unit of learning is a course content. So you have to complete something to happen. And this is not a true statement. In reality, the smallest unit, it shouldn't be a course or a content. It should be the little activity that you in your brain, you reflect, you change, you make a decision. Those are the little moments that we need to capture. And so this is why we used a component here we call the trigger and campaign engine. In this suite, it's waves, but it could be anything that is triggered by actual xAPI statements. So if someone, for example, in assessment came up with 4 categories and um, different levels of where they are today, then we can use those individual elements from the same course just by using xAPI statements to trigger something else along the way later on in the journey. And then, like everybody else, we need to create some sort of a learning experience, and we use Storyline. And here's one example of what it looks like. The theme was 80s, so that's hence the pretty colors. Um, and so this experience was about goal setting. We know that if you don't set your goals, if you don't write those goals down, if you don't have an action plan of how to approach those goals, if you don't think about the resources that you're going to need for your goals, then it's pretty unlikely that you actually get those goals done. And so we wanted to make sure that in these 5 weeks, managers going to work on these goals, own them, commit to them, and then complete them. So this is in Storyline, and what it does throughout this 5 week is that it basically facilitates this dialogue that I was talking about early on. The first level of dialogue is not even visible. It's for me to tell you that think about a goal that is valuable, practical for you, and should be smart. Write it down. So that's the first level of self-reflection. I put it in this thing, I save it. So when I come back again, it's going to be there. The second level of dialogue is between the user and the system. And in this case, you can see there's a smart sort of index. And all it is basically a self-assessment. Each letter brings up a bunch of questions about your goal, and you answer it to yourself. It's a checklist. And then out of this comes a index. So basically, it's a self-reflection on, hey, am I really writing these SMART goals? Are they smart? Then the next stage of this is sharing. This is when the asynchronous social part comes in, sharing this inside the system with others. So now you get feedback from different peers. And giving and getting feedback actually is part of whole emotional intelligence. That's done. And the third part is in the middle of this 5 week, there is a live expert-driven workshop, and they bring those goals now in a good shape, but they get feedback from an expert. So all that goes through the 5 weeks, and then you have these components running through. And what it looks like, and actually every time you change these goals, you revise them, there's an xAPI statement goes into the second brain, sort of learning locker. So we learning professionals can see how they consumed all this content, how they thought they would change their goals, and how does the SMART index reflect that. So you know a lot about people of how they progress through these 5 weeks. And then when it's done and they commit to them, normally what happens is that you think about, okay, now they're doing their goals, we should send out an email maybe or a notification like, hey, remember your goals, go do them. So instead of, loudspeakers shouting in your ear, threatening you that if you don't complete your goals, we're gonna, bring in some bad people and beat you up. We did a little bit of a more, I think, subtle approach, the nudge. It's like the Monty Python nudge Dutch sort of thing. So this is waves. Again, this is the component that does campaigns and triggers that it kicks out when you complete your goal settings and you commit to them. Then it waits 2 weeks. That's enough time in that proof of concept so you can apply at least one of those goals. Then it checks whether you went back and said, yes, I've completed these goals actually on the job, and here's my reflection. If it's not there, then it sends a nudge to you like, hey, remember your goals? And again, just by sending a notification, a nudge about your goals, you actually have a reflection, and you should be able, I should be able to work on these goals. And so that's one. We also know what the goals are. We also know what resources they plan to use. And so we can also say, hey, remember these things? Have you used the coach? Have you went to the Slack channel? Blah, blah, blah. A little bit of a self nudge. If it doesn't work 2 weeks later, we can come back again and maybe notify the facilitator that someone is not performing well on the job, help them. And if not, then we'll just celebrate. Yes, you've done, completed it. Excellent. So from now on, you've used whatever we learned in this goal setting and put it into practice, and then feed it back to the next generation of this going through this experience. So that is sort of the end-to-end exercise that we went through to create this proof of concept. And without getting into the details and actual statements and how we used xAPI custom statements in Storyline, I think what I wanted to think about is almost like a different mindset about xAPI. Sometimes we get stuck in the trenches to trying to get down to the level of who did what and when and how, and building everything in the coding level. It is more like a thinking level of what else can you use this for if you have the right components. And so what I want to leave you with is, if you can get to, obviously you're reaching for the sky and you have the chicken nugget. If you can get the chicken nugget, I think xAPI is still very good for bringing the capability to facilitate meaningful data informed dialogue between machines and humans to drive change through speaking the common language of engagement and motivation. So you can think about it as, this is this is the language that we use, and we mean the same thing from different angles. And then I can talk to you as through a good dialogue that changes his dynamics. But a dialogue is not a download. It's not, I know everything and I'll tell you. It's a good way of communicating between and having some sort of in between triggers that changes my experience and your experience, depending on where you are, what your skill set is, or how you approach things. And so this is the end of the story. My little exercise proof of concept was built. We didn't roll it out yet, so I can't bring you the actual data of what it will. But next step would be actually measuring throughout the experience of how people approached those SMART goals. How did they process through the experience? Did they actually use those resources that they plan to use? What resource did they use? Following up. And then finally, the third part, obviously, did it actually make a difference on the job? So based on the number of difficult conversations they had, the resource questions that we came back from there, and the business attrition, all those KPIs can be then mapped up and see if there's any difference between the old way of doing things and the new way of doing things. And then my final answer to the question of xAPI in Storyline, we not only sending that information back to the LRS, because that again would be just a one-way conversation. We built a dialogue between that. So when you brought up that goal setting anywhere in the 5 weeks, it read back your last goals as is. So it kept it basically as a statement, but we're able to read it back as well. So you can work on it. What it meant for us, learning professionals, that we could see the evolvement of that goal, but in the front end, they don't care about your previous goal. They just want to have the last good version of that in the goal setting device. So that is my little spiel. I'll stop sharing my screen so I can come back to you. And then I try to shoot it for 40. I have
Yeah.
1 minute if there's any questions.
Yeah, please, if there's any questions. And we're going to
Q&A. Oh. Looks like there is no questions. The other one was for Sarah.
Yeah, I think we answered, you answered those questions. And so I'm going to be bringing on stage a person, Elizabeth Patience, and she's going to tell us about her team and updates. If you have any other questions for Zolt, please post them in the chat or the Q&A. If he might respond to them if he has time. And we very much appreciate his wonderful presentation. So thanks. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hello. So we are at the other end of the spectrum of the two case studies you just saw. We are Team Storyline Spring 23, if you want to find us on the Slack channel. And we've gone from basically no xAPI experience, starting to get some of the hearts and minds that Zolt was talking about, but wanting to get our hands on. And we're happy to say that as of last Thursday, we are publishing statements from Storyline to Veracity. So that is huge for us. We have been able to do it when we publish to the web. We haven't figured out how to publish when we're published in an LMS, how to send those statements. We have some extra steps when we publish, and we want to get rid of those. And we'd like to know how to use the Storyline xAPI features. So if anybody knows a good tutorial on that, that would be great. I want to say thank you to the cohort, because it gave us structures and milestones and deadlines and like the push to actually get our hands on. I want to say thanks to Matt Kay from Torrance Learning, who, like, just because the cohort exists and the Slack exists as it does, he was able to go in and look at what we were doing and help us get over some bumps, which we were kind of really struggling with. So thank you for that. And then thanks to Karen, because she put us in touch with Matt, or put Matt in touch with us. And she's also been pushing us to kind of celebrate our wins. So
exactly. Well, thanks so much, Elizabeth. That is absolutely great. I really very much appreciate you coming on and telling us about your team and giving us the update. I thank you. And you didn't see them because I know you were looking at your screen and presenting, but there was a lot of great thumbs up and high fives and wonderful. That's what cohort is all about. It's celebrating those wins, celebrating getting forward, making the progress. I mean, that's what we do, is make the progress. And that's where we hope cohort helps people. So thanks so much, Elizabeth. We really appreciate it.
We are meeting right after this in the lounge. So if anybody wants to join us, you can.
Oh, great. And I think you have a table already set up, right? All right. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, Doug. Hello, Mr. Doug. All right, so give us your team update, please. We're not hearing you. Uh-oh, we're not hearing you. Yep.
How's that?
That is perfect. We can hear you now. Great.
Yeah, it always defaults to the other mic I have. I don't know, Zoom Worlds. Anyway, so Team ChatGPT, aka Team Chat Souffle, has been pushing really hard. We're making a lot of progress. So just to recap our overview of what we're doing, we're building a Twine learning experience to find out how people feel about ChatGPT. For those who don't know, Twine is an interactive fiction game where you can sort of progress through pieces of text in a nonlinear fashion. We are about ready for launch. So our ID team is finishing the last 5% of content, and tonight we are going to launch, hopefully. We're pushing ourselves to share in a very agile way, to put it out there even if it's not 100% perfect. So we're challenging ourselves to operate in an agile way in this instructional design world and xAPI world. So yeah, let me see if I can share my screen and show you guys a little demo here. Let's share this. And let's see. Yes, share. Can you guys see that?
We're seeing it.
Yeah? Great. So I don't know if you can see my xAPI statements that we're logging in the console here, but We have a little twine game here where you answer questions, submit feedback. I'm just walking you through it. We have text areas. We have different tracks you can take. You can copy prompts into ChatGPT. You learn how to write effective distractors, all kinds of things. This is just a sneak peek. I don't want to give away the golden goose right away. We'll share tonight, hopefully, and people can go through it. The cool thing is this is all mobile friendly, and we are sending a lot of xAPI statements. It's really exciting. We have some data people working with our LRS too. So we've built 6 core verbs: interacted, answered, linked, chose, accessed, completed. And completed is kind of neat because you can go through loops within the course and retake them, and we track how many times you've gone through and whether you successfully Am I still on mute? I see somebody saying
No, you're fine. You're fine. We can hear you. We've been able to hear you the whole time.
Good. Okay, I just saw that in chat that someone can't hear. So, okay. So anyway, we have got a lot of cool xAPI statements getting sent, and you can open up your browser console, and maybe I'll put up instructions on how to do that, because we have our LRS actually sending everything into the console. Let me put up a screenshot here, actually. So your console will look like that with all the xAPI statements getting sent. The LRS kicks back a response code 200 if it's good, and you can review the whole xAPI statement yourself as you're going through the course, because I know we're all xAPI learners here, so you can look at what's going on behind the scenes as you go through the course, which is cool. And yeah, one of the other things that we've added since last time is we've added context to a lot of our activities. So we split everybody into groups based on a self-assessment, whether you are, how you feel about ChatGPT, what your level is as an instructional designer. And then each track has parent activities associated with it. So we're noting which track you're on and what that parent is, and all those activities are children of that track. So anyway, that's my spiel on the technical stuff. Kind of boring. Tonight we launch, or tomorrow morning. I'll say tomorrow morning. But what we need, and Zolt said this so wonderfully, is that we want to create impact with this. This is not just about saying we log some xAPI statements, that's it. We want to learn from the community. This cohort has 6,000 people in it or something like that. We can go collect a lot of awesome data here about a new technology, because this is about OpenAI. And we can create a data-driven dialogue, which is another wonderful phrase that I heard today, to generate self-reflection and reflection in the community. So that is the ultimate goal here. It's very aspirational. So we need everybody. This is not just a demo. It's going to be something that hopefully the community can build on for the cohorts after that. So when I post a link in the main channel later today, share it with your friends, mess with it, play with it, have fun with it.
That sounds great, Doug. And yeah, when you see that link come through in Slack, everyone, we can not just share it with the community. Am I hearing that correctly, Doug? You wanted to share it out?
This is for the whole learning design community. So any learning
right.
designers or anybody who's interested in learning design can participate. And we want as many people participating as we can, because we want to learn. And hopefully Learning Guild and everyone in this cohort can learn too, and we can share what we learned together. An xAPI is interoperable, so you can pull this whole thing and tweak it and share it and build your own thing. So
sounds great.
I posted some links there with our code repo. Feel free to make a pull request, poke, ask questions, stuff like that. Check it out. I added some docs in there too. So
wonderful.
Awesome.
Oh, lots of great stuff there. Thanks so much, Doug.
Great.
Thanks, everybody. Now, next week, the 13th and the 20th, we have our Share Your Work, where we're going to do a deeper dive than we do in these couple of minutes. So what I would love for you to do is I'm going to reach out to some of you individually. And if you haven't presented before, that's okay. Don't worry about it. Like on one of these project demos, just feel free to reach out to me. And we're going to give everyone a few more minutes, like maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15. It depends on how many people who want to actually take a deeper dive with like maybe showing code reviews and their work product, your project purpose, who's on your team, who's been doing the work, how did you divide the work up, what are your documents, if any, if you created. I mean, Doug shared some great documents, but if you didn't create any documents, that's fine. You can just talk about what you did. Share the data that's been created if you have a complete project. So we're hoping that Doug will come back and share his data with us on one of those 2 days. How did you get the groups together? Where did you find the information for your project? And that's part of the whole thing of the cohort here, is that we want to crowdsource our information. And you saw Matt Kay came in and saw Elizabeth, and he helped her. And quite honestly, I was going to go reach out to Matt, but Matt saw your post before I was able to reach out. So it was all on Matt. I wish I could say I was the intermediary, but Matt jumped in. He saw that there was some conversation going on. He's an xAPI guru, evidently at Torrance Learning. So big shout out to him. So I'm going to reach out to some of you and give you a little bit of list of stuff that we think might help you kind of guide your sharing of your work. And we hope to see a bunch of you present in the next couple of days. And then we'll kind of do a round table where we're going to kind of discuss the whole cohort as an entity and how we can maybe improve it. Kind of a little bit of a debrief on the 20th. So thanks, everyone. I know I went over time. I apologize, but I wanted to get some of this information in, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye, everyone.